Today we're going to talk about the course in general, and I'm going to give just a brief overview of the entire course. So the course is really, the first part of this course is really about the publication process. And the publication process is a long, complex process, can be long, that involves a number of people. And one of our goals in this course is that you understand the publication process so that you can fully take advantage and understand what's going on at each stage of the process. We found that publishing is not simply writing a good paper, but understanding all of the social interactions that go on within the process. The first aspect of it, of course, is finding the journals that you want to publish in. These journals can be very prestigious. They can be relatively unknown. They could be in your native language. They can be in English. They can be international journals, or they can be regional journals. They can be printed journals, or they can be online journals. And all journals are rated using a variety of statistics, an impact factor, which looks at how often articles in the journals are cited, downloads, how many articles are downloaded from the journals. There's been a whole research area that looks simply at journals. Journals usually consist of an editorial board, an editor, an associate editor, and then a whole group of volunteer reviewers. And when you submit a paper to a journal, it's very important that you understand the journal, what kinds of articles the journal publishes. Sometimes it may be a topic, but sometimes it may be a certain approach to the topic. For example, I was editor of a journal, and I had learned this the hard way. I had gotten a paper rejected, but I learned that they only accepted papers that demonstrated how student writing improved. They didn't want theoretical papers. Other journals may have biases towards certain topics. They may like topics. So before you submit to a journal, make sure you're very familiar with the types of articles that the journal has already published. The review process, of course, can be very painful for some people. It could be very long and frustrating. It's also a chance for now, of course, you have peers, you have advisors, professors who can help you. But once you're outside of graduate school, the review process can be your primary source of feedback on your paper. The process usually involves, when you submit the article to an editor, the editor may make some judgment about its suitability, and then the editor will look for reviewers to review the paper, 2 or 3. Sometimes you're allowed to choose the reviewers, or at least sometimes choose who you don't want to review. Most of the time, particularly in my field, you do not choose the reviewers. Reviewing is double blind, meaning you don't know the reviewer and they don't know you. That can lead to some very nasty exchanges, particularly when there's some disagreement. And just like any kind of anonymity, such as when you're driving on the expressway, people do things and say things that they wouldn't necessarily do to your face. There could be multiple phases of the review period. Rarely, unless your article was solicited, is it automatically accepted on the first chance. Normally there are 4 areas you can get: accepted with minor revisions, rejected but resubmit, and rejected. And it's important to understand that rejected with but resubmit can be a very good thing, so you should view that positively. and before you make a decision as to whether you want to proceed to the next revision stage. Another part of this course, of course, is we're going to write grants. And to do research, you often need money. And one way of getting money is to apply for a grant. And also, as graduate students, there are other aspects of publication we'll talk about, going to conferences, paying for subjects, and some of these things you can also find in grants. So in this class, what we'd like you to do is find a real grant application and fill and submit that grant, and at least go through the process of writing the grant. So for this assignment, there's no particular length. It all depends on what the grant is. Of course, you don't have to submit the grant. Also, if the grant deadlines come early, we can arrange at least a tutorial so that we can spend time going over your grants earlier in the semester rather than waiting for when it comes up in the course. Conferences are another aspect of the publication process. Conferences give you the opportunity to share your research with other people, but sometimes I find more importantly, it gets you to understand what people are discussing, what questions they're raising, what's argumentative, where people disagree, and what areas that people find interesting. And so when you go back and you start thinking about your research, you often can incorporate many of the ideas and controversies into your paper that you heard at the conference. It's a chance to network and meet people. One thing I was taught is always look good, because you never know who's listening to you. There may be a future job sitting there waiting for you at the conference, and you'll never know it. Somebody there from another university who might want to interview you. You just never know what's going to happen, so you have to be always on your best. Another area we're going to talk about is ethics. Probably the most controversial issue is plagiarism, but in the field of publication, there are all kinds of issues that go on. There are issues regarding, for example, there's a general rule that states that you can only submit your paper to one journal at a time. That can be frustrating for many people because they have to sit and wait, and you never know how long the review process is going to take. Editors have been trying recently to speed it up, but reviewers are not paid, so there's not much the editor can do to get the review in faster because it's a volunteer job. You can, once a decision has been made, if you're not comfortable with the decision, particularly obviously if they reject you, then you can pull your paper out at that time. If they ask you to resubmit, you can decide whether you want to resubmit or not. There are other ethical issues having to regard sending papers, for example, very similar papers to journals. There are issues regarding your research work, falsification of data, and of course there's plagiarism, although sometimes in this context, plagiarism, even though the university thinks it's the most important thing, it may not be. One of the interesting issues that I have come across, and it's actually somewhat related to journals, is the idea of open access. Open access refers to the fact that while most journals you have to pay to read, some journals are online free so that everybody in the world who has access to the internet can download articles, and that can be very important for research. The dark side of this has been the proliferation of what are called pay-to-publish journals. Most of them are now open access, and they'll constantly solicit you for your manuscripts. And often maybe $100, $200, $400, even higher, they charge you The review system is questionable. It's not clear, and they're clearly not going to be count very much in evaluating your own work. So you have to be very cautious about some of these journals. The same problem actually applies to conferences. There are many kind of fraudulent conferences, where you don't really get much out of it except maybe a certificate that you showed up. And they can be very expensive, although they're often in very nice vacation places. So what we're going to cover in the tutorial is really the writing process. We're going to start at the beginning of your paper and work our way through it. Please bring to the tutorial a copy of the journal or some articles from the journal, a copy of the guidelines for authors, and your paper. And we're going to go back and forth between trying to understand the journal that you've submitted and the paper and how the writing is. And so we're going to look very closely in the tutorials about what published papers in a particular journal look like, and then how your paper compares to that. In the next episode of this course, we'll discuss the journal, go more detail into the nature of journals. Thank you.